Hello, and thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Marcus J. Cage, and this is What I've Been Thinking with Marcus J. Cage. In today's episode, I kind of wanted to get into where I come from in my political leanings, my political background, a little bit about my philosophy, and some of the people who've inspired me, whether they've been presidents or other famous people that most of us know throughout history. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Hello, and thank you for joining me. In this show, talking about my earliest political memories and backgrounds, actually starts off in an unusual place. Starts off with a Democratic candidate, a man by the name of Michael Dukakis in 1988. Michael Dukakis was Democratic candidate for president. And at that time, I was a small little kid running around, only about 7 years old at the time. Um, that election, my family was very, very involved and paid attention. And a little background, my family is predominantly Democratic, and I grew up in a very, very strong traditional Democratic household. We were big on unions and a lot of the things with the civil rights movement and helping with the lower income and the working class. And so that's where my family's political base comes from. And that's where my initial foundation starts with. So, back to what I was talking about with Michael Dukakis. Um, at that time, my family supported him and he's on TV. So that's what I'm seeing. And that's kind of my first entree, if you will, as he was facing former President George Herbert Walker Bush, the father of George W. Bush. Um, at that time, when I was younger, I didn't really understand as much what was going on, but there were a couple of things which, even at that young age, were very impressionable upon me. The one thing I did remember repeatedly was Willie Horton. Those of you who are not familiar with Willie Horton, I do implore you to look it up and look into it. He was a criminal, a convicted criminal who was incarcerated, and through one of the programs, which the governor at the time, Michael Dukakis, governor of Massachusetts at the time, allowed a program for prisoners to go and I'm trying to think of what's the best word, that they would go and have, I guess, free time or have kind of a release on the weekends to be able to have, I guess, for good behavior. And Willie Horton, while he was out on that time period, um, raped a woman and murdered her, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and that became one of the things which the Bush campaign, the senior Bush, used to attack Dukakis over and over. And it was effective. At the time, I still wasn't tying into much to things because, mind you, it's 87. I was born in 81, so I'm only 7 years old. Um, but a few years down the road, we start having the drum ups towards uh, Iraq. The first time with Iraq, when the Iraqis and Saddam were going into the Kuwaiti oil fields. And at that time, we were on the same side as Iraq. So when we were basically going into Iraq, getting it mixed up. We were on the same side of Kuwait at the time, defending Kuwait against Iraq. Um, we had previously did business and worked out arrangements with Iraq, but we still weren't actually always necessarily on the same page with them. And we also had interest for the oil ourselves. But without getting too deep off to that subject, the war itself. Mine at the time, I was only in the fifth grade. So around that time, what I remember mostly is it was everywhere across most of the major networks. It was covered nonstop, and it was even pushed through a lot of the elementary school kids to write letters to the troops, those who were being deployed and those who were actively already deployed. Uh, Myself personally, having an uncle, which I was very close with, who was active duty, um, did give me a lot of cause to worry and concern for what was actually going on with these things. So that's what started to pique my curiosity more and more. I apologize if I look down a lot. I wanted to make some notes so I can try to stay pretty concise on my thoughts and not leave anything out, so that I can try to answer and fulfill everything out as clear as I can, so you guys get a really good sense of where I'm coming from with some of these issues down the road, even when you may disagree with me, so you'll at least understand where I come from in my thinking and my perspective. Um, so I was talking about that we had a big push with the whole desert storm and desert shield that was going on at the time. Also, after that, shortly after, I remember it was we had the Black Hawk Down incident, which happened in Mogadishu, Somalia. Um, those that was nonstop across a lot of the airways, and you think for a kid who's roughly about 9, 10, 11 years old, you're old enough to see what's going on and understand the visuals, but not understand all the politics and the minutia which is going on for the situation. But, these little things are constantly being factored in little ways, whether you completely understand them or not. On to that, noticing those things that always made me keep more of a concerted focus on national security and on the things which are going on within our American foreign policy and how it affects veterans first and foremost, because that was my perspective, looking from a sense of concern at a loved one, a family member. So as a kid, having that emotional connection fueled me into my curiosity of knowledge into the subject. Um, uh, Along with some of the things which went on with the Bush administration, senior Bush, like to clarify, because I will speak about the Bush, George W. Bush later on in this. But some of the things which went on during his administration um, uh, forced me to look at the previous president, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, a lot of the policies and things which went on during the 80s formed and concreted a lot of the point of views which I have towards politics today, because they were so impactful, I feel, towards the course which America's turned in. Um, there are tons of pivotal moments within American history and world history, of course, but in my lifetime, there have been two presidents which have been massively impactful to the whole entire world, and not necessarily in a positive way. And I'll get into those other couple of presidents, but the Reagan administration, with all the things which went on, whether it was the hostages, where he was negotiating behind the sitting president's back, which he was actually even called out on it. Jimmy Carter actually phone called Ronald Reagan at the time and told him to knock it out. This is treasonous. We could bring you up on charges for this. I'm not going to do it, but stop. Don't do this. Reagan continued anyway, and it actually helped to getting him elected. Not saying that Carter was a great, great president. He did his goods, and there were some things which he wasn't the greatest on. But as an ex-president, I think he's pretty awesome, and he could have been a little bit better during his actual elected period. But Reagan did a lot of underhanded, crooked, and dirty things throughout his administration, and that's what I learned. I also learned that one of the big things that was, I guess, understated, I feel, in the H.W. Bush administration is one of the first things which he did when he came into power is he actually pardoned a lot of the people from the Iran-Contra and different affairs that went on under the Reagan administration, in which he was the vice president. If there would have been a possible Democratic president, I believe it's a possibility that Reagan might have been brought under a little bit more heat and fire. But because he was succeeded by his vice president, they were able to dust everything under the rug. And there's one of the first instances, I didn't notice it at the time, but that was one of the first major fractures when the media kind of start dropping the ball and didn't really press on things. In the late 80s, there was a lot more coverage and pushback from the media, and you'll notice as it got into the 90s, to the mid 90s, to the 2000s, the pushback got less and less and less. Also, you'll notice most of the media organizations became monopolies. It became only a handful, and the message became a lot more concerted and a lot less diverse of opinion and analysis. Those are things I didn't notice at the time right away, but over time, as I've looked back, I've started to notice the little rifts here and there. Through the policies of the Reagan administration, which we didn't see the full effects until going into the Bush administration and then to Bill Clinton's administration, of the crack epidemic, of gang violence, of a lot of the destruction of the unions, which took place under both Reagan and under Bush. A lot of the deregulation that went on, and deregulation which carried on into Bill Clinton. At that time, I was still in the camp of being a good Democratic vote blue soldier, meaning I trust the narrative that you would hear from most Democratic politicians, and by default, anything which came from a Republican was completely nonsense. I didn't want to hear it for the most part. But there was nuance in there, and I started to learn that as I started to dig back through some of my historical points of reference. I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but this is in my little timeline where we're kind of sticking as far as my development. I am right about my teenage years. Probably about maybe, I'll say middle school age, because seeing these effects on the economy around me, on the community, watching in the late 80s and early 90s as Wall Street was doing great, and watching, my family and my community start to struggle and to start to go backwards. It wasn't massive, but it was just a little bit. And it started through the inner cities and out into the rural areas. And it also started to matriculate into other areas. But because it was minor little chippeways, or maybe it was this place in Ohio, or this place in Idaho, or this place in Oklahoma, some of the powers that be in some of the larger cities, maybe a Chicago, maybe in New York, maybe LA, didn't feel the same effects. And maybe the city as a whole might have been doing well and doing great despite some of the other problems which I listed before. The powers that be see it as overall our city is doing great and we're doing a great job. And I felt like that was some of the problems where I started to see that I was splitting apart from my own party. And that was even at an early age, at say 13, 14. My middle school teacher, my middle school history teacher, his name was Mr. Smalley. Mr. Smalley taught me how to really look at history and look in between the lines and read the actual story that most of us aren't reading. We're looking at, well, in 1782 to 1812, this happened, that happened. No, he started to show me that there's a story if we started looking deeper and deeper and deeper. And that story which he used to teach me to look deeper into history and how the different things tied between the different wars and different conquests and the colonization that's went on around the world, how it was all tied into politics. And he used Christopher Columbus in 1492 to really show me how history and politics is really, really tied together. And then a little bit later on into my high school years, a shout out to Dr. Donnie Mitchell, Washington High School. He was my history and American government teacher. And the way he actually showed me how legislation and the Constitution and how all these different things worked with historical things, how things have been changed, how they've been able to add amendments, how not only was it certain bills that were put forward and how they were impactful, how these bills got to pass, how they got in front of, these different legislators, because it's easy for us to think that most of our favorite heroes and politicians were these benign figures that saw all the problems and were able to come up with solutions. But when you're to that level of power, I feel, at least in modern politics, in order for you to get to that level, it's kind of indicative that you're going to be a certain amount distant from the people who are most suffering in society and the people who you're trying to work for and help. So you're going to have blinders on in a lot of ways. And so you're going to need that pressure and that grassroots movement and those organizers and all of those different things are going to have to factor in to get those actual policies tailored the right way to help the right people that need to be helped. And one of my favorite presidents of all time, who I would say a lot of my political theory and philosophy lean towards, FDR. FDR, a lot of lefties love FDR, and they give him a lot of credit, and credit should be given to him. We also should not forget about the internment camps and the racist things that he said and done also. But that's virtually any of our founding fathers. I could pretty much obliterate all of them on a negative way, and I could find positives for majority of them. Some of them are completely horrible, so it's nothing good to say about them. But That said, on the positive notes of FDR and about how he pushed for the social safety net, it was actual activists. It was actual protesters on the ground. It was actual socialists, communists, Marxists, anarchists. All of these people, all let's see, populists, and all of these different people, libertarians. I forget about. Sorry, all of these different people pushed and pushed and pushed the New Deal, Social Security, all of these different progressive left wing policies, which everybody right or left loves today, even though plenty want to demonize and criticize. But these programs have lasted the tale of time. We've had other presidents come in after them and do little procedures here and there and whatever. But the one thing you have to acknowledge and be truthful on is FDR's idea and legislation has stood up as obviously effective and beneficial for this country and nation. Um, let's see. Sorry, it keeps jumping around a little bit, trying to make sure that I'm able to keep you guys on my timeline, but also when I remember my certain influences which fit into that time period, kind of slide them in there also. So bear with me. Some of the effects that I feel later on during the Reagan administration, because Reagan probably affected me the most, I feel, in the negative ways to influence me politically thinking, and FDR probably influenced me the most positive. So I'm going to have obviously those two opposing forces, which I'll continue to talk about. The negatives, which I felt of the Reagan administration, which I felt my community and myself of what felt the effects of negatively. There are plenty out there who are listening to this and plenty out there who remember those time periods that maybe it was a different experience for them and maybe it was more positive. I'm not trying to tell you that reality, whatever your reality was, wasn't your reality. And because it went negative for me or for others, that means it was horrible for you. Every presidency, there are certain people who are always going to get the negative end of the stick, and some people who are always going to benefit from it. So, we'll leave that up for other debates at another time. Let's see. On our little timeline, this will put me roughly around my early high school years, maybe 9th, 10th grade. During that time period, another major foreign policy episode went on. We had Bosnia and Kosovo going on at that time period. And my high school, my city, Kansas City, hometown, was a sister city to Bosnia, I believe. And so when they had that major conflict happen with Milosevic and all the mass casualty, I mean, not mass casualties, but the mass graves, the bombings, I can't remember what word, genocide. The genocide that he was committing on the minority population there, through just watching it from TV, I was kind of getting a little feel about it. But my high school started to receive a bunch of refugees who started going to school with us there, and having a large number of teenagers who are roughly your own age who were telling you war stories about what's going on in their country and how they're having to hide from soldiers and different things like that, how they had certain family members who've been murdered or kidnapped and things like that. And it for me personally, it was impactful on me, and it made me feel like I want to be able to, if needed, if called upon, to be able to be a force for good, to be able to go out and help people in these kind of situations. I live in the most powerful nation in the world. And so if my theory at the time that our military is a benevolent force and we're out there to do good, I believe that joining the military is a good thing in that I'm doing a benevolent act to help. And so, I had different other goals and dreams and things that I wanted to do, but had issues with, minor injuries and things like that. And so I decided, I've always been pretty patriotic, have, besides just the uncle I spoke about earlier, who was active duty at the time, I had other uncles and other family members who were active duty, some who are active duty now. And so at that time period, it was very easy for me to decide to go to the military because my family is already a military family. And, most people, if you look at it, the careers which they follow into are normally careers of other family members that have preceded them. So in that respect, I'm not too far off from the average population, even though the amount of the population which joins the military or which is family of military or dependents or whatever, it's still, 1% to 10% at max. So I decided to join the military after that. At that time, Bill Clinton's the president. Not in love with some of the things he's doing as far as NAFTA. At that time, I really was didn't like Glass-Steagall because I'd done some research on how Glass-Steagall had led to it was a law that was put in place after the Great Depression to stop banks from basically operating like casinos. At that time, they could trade on futures, commodities, oils, whatever that they wanted to trade on, fruit, oranges, whatever. Once the Depression happened, Glass-Steagall made it illegal for them to do that. And so they had to operate as a traditional bank again. So it was, home loans, business loans, things like that. It was stocks, bonds, instead of trading on Wall Street. Well, when Clinton came in the office, that was one of the first bills which he signed. It freed up the banks to start doing those things all over again, which started leading to lower savings percentages. It started leading to the banks getting into futures trading and blue chip acquisitions. It also led to banks starting to do bank buybacks. So, buying a whole lot of their stocks back. So when you hear about the Goldman Sachs and all these places which we bailed out, and they get this big chunk of money from the government, billions and billions of dollars, and then they go and buy their own stock back, artificially inflate the value to maximize on their profits over and over and over. And if you just look at GDP and the way the stock market gets going, those things can trick you into believing that the economy is healthy and strong. But there are a lot of other factors which you can look into if you really, really wanted to look at the economy in a much more helpful way. I could show you, but we won't go into that, or we'll save that for another episode. On to the military. I'll be careful with some of the stuff that I'll talk about. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with some of the stuff, my experiences in the military. But I do want to talk about how my military experience affected my political beliefs and leanings. When 9/11 happened, I was in Catania, Sicily, Italy, at Naval Air Station Sigonella. At that time, the intel that we were given is that it was a possible worldwide attack. The base which I was at was a high value target if that intel was correct. So we were on extreme high alert. Uh, I literally remember the week before that, you could just walk straight up to the gate, say, "Hey, I want to go visit this person." Um, Mind you, this is in Italy, so you could bring like an Italian national. I could bring a friend over. They basically show up, show their ID. Yeah, I call them, say, "Yeah, just let them in." They walk around the base virtually on their own, and then you come and meet up with me at the pool hall or whatever. Well, even once we even once things settle back down, you still would have to come all the way down. You would have to show all your paperwork, all their paperwork. It gets faxed over. You have time and checkpoints that you need to be here. If you say you're going to go to this place, then they need to verify that you're there. And the amount of security and change just in normal basic life, not even thinking about wartime, just the amount of security, how things have changed, just the feeling in the country. I mean, I think about pre 9/11, and to me, it's almost like, man, it's a country which has had, still a certain amount of innocence to it. And it felt like just 9/11 took away that innocence. It took away that sense of safety. And I don't feel America's actually really recovered from it. Uh, some of the other things as far as military, I won't go into the, let's see, no, I will go into it. Um, Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, at the time, I completely supported it because I felt, yes, we should go in. Uh, Bin Laden attacked us, yada, yada, yada. Fill in the rest. You guys know what happened then. But as I started to learn more information, mind you, I was active duty. I'm talking about maybe a year after 9/11 and probably about when some of the first boots on the ground were going into Afghanistan, because at that time, um, I had some of my fellow shipmates, which I knew, who were getting orders and getting sent there on in different capacities. And this is like really, really early in the process before they started doing some of the mass buildups. Um, some of the information which a lot of people don't know is that the Afghanistan government was willing to turn over Osama bin Laden if we didn't enter the country. We chose to come back with a counteroffer. Our counteroffer was, we want bin Laden and we want the Taliban gone also. They said, well, the Taliban is our government. You might have a disagreement with our government, and basically we're trying to rectify that by giving you this person who attacked your country. Our response was, that's not good enough. You guys gave him safe passage. We want you guys out of there. So that's what we did. We went into the country, even though we could have acquired bin Laden without sending in troops to Afghanistan, which at that time I didn't know it at the time when we first went in, but shortly after, maybe about I want to say about a year after we were in Afghanistan, I knew about that. And other people had learned about that information. And that's what started a lot of the early anti-Iraq war protests and a lot of the anti-war movement, anti-regime change movement. But it didn't really boil to a head until after we had been in Iraq and we captured Saddam, and Saddam was, tried and executed. And then we look up and it's like, okay, Saddam's gone, Bin Laden's gone, Taliban's gone. Why are we still here? And as casualties would go up and go down, and I'm talking about our troops, their troops, and civilian casualties, because a factor a lot of people don't know, roughly about 90% of the people who were killed on their side were civilian casualties. And it had a lot to do with our drones. It had a lot to do with inaccurate smart bombs, which we say are very accurate. Um, and so all of those things started to bother me more and more and more about what we were doing as far as our role in the military. Though I still supported the military, though I still supported my fellow shipmates and fellow troops and soldiers, and Marines out there, I started to wonder, are we being used for what we're supposed to be used for? I have no problem with defending this country and, sticking my neck out there so that all my loved ones, or not even loved ones, just all the other fellow Americans can be safe. Even if you agree with me, whether you agree with me or not, whether you think I'm stupid, whether you're a racist who would just call me nothing but the N-word up and down. My mindset is I'm still fighting for you. And whether we disagree on whatever, I'm going to stick up for Americans and protect our nation. And when I started to notice and see certain things which really started to bother me, as in how much private contractors were being involved in a lot of these things, how many different oil companies and pharmaceutical companies and all these other things which shouldn't be involved in war or should not be in this war zone are in this war zone. And we're spending resources to protect these people, and instead of do this mission that we're supposed to be doing, which nobody's exactly clear cut on what the goal or objective or end game is. And then back to our media, there's no real pushback to any of this. Well, that's not entirely true. There was pushback, I remember. There was one network, MSNBC, which that drawed me into that network as a veteran who was against a lot of these regime change wars. But I mean, where MSNBC was when I first came across it in 2002, I guess, 2003, 2004, it's light years from where it was. I mean, it's almost, if these people who are on MSNBC now were on MSNBC back then, they would have been telling you, yes, we must go to Iraq. We must stay in Iraq. And the surge, I mean, it might as well have been Fox News. I mean, because the point of views, especially on foreign policy, the things which attracted me into that network are gone. That's not the way those people think anymore. And anybody who watches it, be careful when you're hearing some of their point of views. Research some of these people, what they're talking about. Research some of their backgrounds. You'd be surprised how many people they put on network who have been defrauded, not defrauded, but have been fired from this position, have been caught lying, have been brought up on charges, have been dismissed by both parties. I mean, I ask for you and implore for you to just, do a little bit of research on some of these people before you trust, everything that they're feeding you. All right, getting to the end of this or whatever. I know I've kind of went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but like I said before, I want to give you guys a real good insight into my thinking and my influences. Let's see. After I got out of the military, Um, my thinking before and my thinking after, uh, since I spent quite a bit of time overseas, spent time in Europe, living in Europe for a few years, it really shaped my views towards the social safety net. I spent a lot of time, whether traveling through or, whether I was in Italy, Spain, some of the other countries, which um, are lean more social democratic. Um, to those of you who don't understand what I mean by social democratic is um, on the on the leftward spectrum of politics, before you get to a socialist, you have two more notches before you get all the way to a socialist. You have democratic socialists, which democratic socialists believes in a good amount of a mixture, I guess, a mixture of capitalism and actual socialism, actually the government controlling certain means of certain things in society. The person who carries that label is most famous for it right now would be Bernie Sanders. Even though he calls himself a democratic socialist, he's actually more of a social democrat. I'll explain what I mean by democratic socialist versus social democrat. A social democrat, on the other hand, does not actually believe in socialist policies per se, as in the government actually taking over whole institutions. There's a couple of little exceptions which lean a little bit that way to make you think so, but they don't actually, like, for instance, an actual democratic socialist, it would be perfectly fine with the government taking over the hospitals, not only the insurance system, that they'd be fine with taking over the actual hospital system, making all the doctors federal employees and things like that. So that's what I'm saying. When we're talking about these subjects, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, I just want to kind of make sure that we're being clear on exactly what we're talking about here. The Social Democrat, on the other hand, believes that we need to have a strong social safety net, i.e., the public school systems, retirement funds, college, healthcare, all those things like that. But it doesn't believe in the government completely taking over. It does believe in private entity being able to make a profit and being able to try to figure out which things that are not a human need, and everything that's not a need that we all need basically to survive, that those things can all be sold and we can make as much profit and do whatever with it. But for the rest of the things that you actually need, those things will be considered a human right. And so that's basically the only difference. That's the difference between a democratic socialist and a social democrat. Then you go over to, now technically some would look at it as, oh, well, now you get to Democrats, which I argue Democrats, democratic socialists and social democrat both fall up under a Democrat. Under Democrat, I feel where it starts to break apart is trying to figure out a progressive, a liberal, how those things, how all these things, moderate, conservative, Dem, how all these things kind of float about. And how I understand them is liberal, for the most part, is on social issues. If your main issue is about getting more equality for the different races, if it's more about women's rights, if it's gay, trans issues, if it's focusing more on things like that, reproductive rights, a lot of those things will be that I consider more as the cultural fights between the right and left. Those things would lean you more into a liberal house. When you're talking about a progressive, and this is one thing which I wanted to talk about this because a lot of people mix this up. When they talk about a progressive is not, okay, well, you're big on this different cultural issue. It's not about cultural issues or identitarian issues. It's about economic issues. It's about how you are on policy. If you if you're pushing for, say, higher minimum wage, that's a progressive policy. If you're going towards less military funding, that's progressive. Um, Things like that, those are progressive things. If you're going for, ending student loan debt, things like that, those are progressive things. And some Democrats want to pretend that they're progressives. They're liberals, but they're not necessarily progressives. Um, you also can be a progressive and a populist. Also, you being a progressive, uh, a lot of people try to say, well, Trump was more progressive than this person or that person. Trump has not been progressive on anything, so let's never ever use him in the same sentence with progressive. You could probably say he's a false populist because populists inspire the people, so it's not necessarily a right or a left issue. Uh, okay, I guess that basically gets you up to speed with a lot of the different influences and things which have happened to mold my point of view. Some of the people which I would like to quickly shout out and talk about that influenced me. Malcolm X is definitely one of them. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, Marcus Garvey. Uh, One of my favorite presidents, which a lot of people wouldn't realize, is a Republican, um, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And, you know, I guess some of those other ones that I could go and elaborate more, but because I am a Democrat and I am talking about a Republican, I will elaborate a little bit more on Ike. Uh, I believe that the interstate highway system, which he created and helped get going in this country, is one of the things which catapulted us head and shoulders above a lot of other nations. And a lot of other things as far as just how he was on ethics and morals for the most part, I definitely admired. Um, you can't deny that under his presidency, he had decent economies, and besides all the racism and segregation and stuff, economically, he had a pretty successful presidency. One of the things why I catapult him into one of my favorites is because one issue which plagues us now, he warned us about it, and he's been the last president to actually even address this as a problem. He talked about the military industrial complex. And being former military, I got to see it up close and personal, what they're talking about. If we were out there fighting a lot of these wars and conflicts to defend America, I would be 100% behind it. But our military is being used to prop up and help make money for a lot of our corporations. And that's the honest to God truth. That's what's really going on. This isn't me trying to slander from a left wing angle like Republicans or whatever, because the problem is bipartisan. The problem is both of the establishments of the Republican and the Democratic Party have completely sold us out, the left and the right as a nation. And until we start to wake up and realize that and start to push back, I'm pushing back from the left. Those of you who are on the right who are listening, I ask for you to push back from the right. Until we start doing that, until we start pushing out these dishonest actors, we will continue to struggle with a lot of the issues that we're having because of the misinformation that we will continue to receive from our media. And our media is, I say, one of the biggest problems. I don't agree with Trump on very much, but when he talks about fake news and the dishonest, lying media, and the media is the enemy of the people, I don't like that framing of the enemy as the sorry, got a little tongue tied. the media is the enemy of the people, because that infers like that they're out with, machine guns and ready to gun you down and kill you. I don't feel that they are the enemy in that respect, but I believe they are a very dishonest actor, and their goal is to manipulate you. Um, I believe the media has a point of view and have a perspective, and they're always going to try to frame things in a way to try to push you into a frame of thinking. And if you just sit and watch and you just let them just rattle off and get going and don't ever take a moment to pause and stop and think about some of the things they're saying or ask the questions, because they don't bring back anybody who's going to push back and ask real questions. It's up for us to sit back and ask those questions, a little bit more deeply. So that's a little bit of that. Well, not a little bit, that's a lot. Those are some of my greatest influencers. Oh, I forgot. Before I start wrapping up, another one, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was big on busting up monopolies, busting up corruption, and those monopolies and that corruption are eating us alive today. And we could definitely use a little bit of FDR. We can use a little Eisenhower pushing it back against the military-industrial complex. We could use a little bit of Teddy Roosevelt busting up the banks and Facebook and social media and all those social media platforms. Let's see. Of course, Lincoln is a favorite, though there are a lot of issues where Lincoln gets a lot of credit, where people should actually have a little bit more criticism towards Lincoln. And I feel this way about every one of the people who I bring up on my list. I could literally bring up something good or bad or positive or disqualifying about every single person who I consider a leader, who I consider who's been impactful, who's helped this nation. But it's up for us as individuals to weigh out the good with the bad. One of the phrases which I used to hear all the time is, be careful, never throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, if you don't get what that means, just because you got some bad here, don't toss out all the good you have too. So, I try to keep that in mind with any leaders or any people that we're talking about, to try to have an objective point of view. I think I've gave you guys a good amount of information there. I think you guys understand how my mind works a little bit as far as political thinking. Oh, yes. I figure I'll close on this note before I get on to my next video, I'm going to make that one quick. That's going to be my official Bernie video, because I am a Bernie supporter. I hadn't made a video yet because I wanted to wait until I got my channel rolling and be able to stay with some of the topics that are going on, and then later on be able to release this. I figure it's no rush. So I'll be dropping my Bernie video after this one, and then I guess I'll close out my political influences. Oh, that's right. Throw my little funny one in there. George Carlin. George Carlin's one of my favorites. Even though he's a comedian, he's definitely been influential to me. And those of you who know, like, his favorite tagline, it's a big old club and you ain't in it. That's exactly how most of us on the left feel. But on to Obama. This was probably one of the last things which has really made my turn and change in my thinking. Even at the time when Obama was going into, at the time when Obama was starting to make his political rise, though I always leaned more to the left, because at that time I was a big Bernie supporter even then. And I'm talking about, I remember being a Bernie supporter serious Bernie supporter in the late 90s into the early 2000s, but I just never thought he would run. But when I saw Obama run, at that time, I wasn't an Obama supporter. I actually supported John Edwards until his whole little issue. To those of you who don't know what's going on, he had an affair, and it ended up tanking his campaign. He had to drop out, and it almost went to jail and other things, other different things. But that's a long story we won't go into. I was supporting a man that some of you guys know, some of you guys don't know, a man by the name of Mike Gravel after him. Once I started to listen to his anti-war message, I was completely Team Gravel. But at that time, Hillary was getting a lot more of the attention. John Edwards was getting a lot more of the attention. And Obama was starting to get a lot more of the attention. After Obama won Iowa and a lot of the other candidates started dropping out, it was down to Hillary or Obama. And when I saw him win Iowa and then get that large African-American support in South Carolina, I was like, oh, wow, this guy can actually win. The first time, at that time I even was saying, we're not going to have a black president. It's just too soon. I don't think America's ready. But, I was wrong. Obama did get elected. And though he wasn't very clear on the campaign trail, and that bothered me because I was a Gravel guy before. Gravel had actually showed me that, hey, we can have a politician in this day and age who's actually going to start talking about some policy on what they're going to actually do and actually start to make some changes, which I think will be, actually helpful. Well, I let the whole, Obama will be the first black president, and that felt so good to be able to, wake up that next morning and have Obama as president. Well, some of the issues which he said on the campaign trail, I wanted to see if he was actually going to do it. And so I was patient. I gave Obama as much time, okay, is he going to do this? Is he going to do that? And what I started to notice on issue after issue after issue after issue, Obama almost always negotiated himself out of positions before he even started negotiating with the opposition. That was one thing that bothered me. And then two, some of the things which he promised that he would do day one or in his first year, which he could have done by executive order, he didn't do. Some of the other things which he could have done, if he would have did them before he went for healthcare, he probably could have got a lot more done because some of those things would have been more bipartisan. But all the way which Obama went about things, at first I took it as, they're just giving him so much obstruction that he can't get anything done, which they were giving him. Probably the most obstruction of any president I've ever seen, and that I can think of through all the studying that I've studied. But he also did negotiate against himself before he got to the point. So by the time they negotiated, most of the stuff he was doing were very low in impact to the average person. Even Obamacare, signature bill, it made sure that you had pre-existing conditions, that you could still get health care, but it did not do anything for costs. It didn't do anything for drug prices or co-pays, any of those things. And so all it did, from what I noticed for a lot of people, is just gave them a fee that they had to pay, because a lot of them chose to just pay the fine than to go for the insurance because they couldn't afford it. So when I look back at the Obama administration, we went into, because of the authorization done during the Bush administration, it allowed for Obama to be able to have military authorizations without having to go through the natural way of going about it through Congress. And so since he had that at his disposal, we're not in only Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we're in arguably 7 to 8, possibly even 9 different countries. And that was extended under Obama, not anybody else. And when I notice the media won't cover that, the media won't talk about it. And when the media is talking about it, it's normally Fox News, which, since Fox spent so much time demonizing Obama about every little thing in his first year, and there were so many attacks that came from a racial tone, it made it hard to take the very people who are attacking him for everything serious when there's actually something that they are saying. And that was one of the things which took me longer to see some of the things with the Obama administration, because his first 4 years completely didn't notice anything. But I won't say anything. I let plenty of things slide because I felt that in time he would get better. And I felt that the obstruction was the biggest pull in what was going on. But as I got down the road, I started noticing that that's just Obama's way. Obama is a moderate Democrat who campaigned as a leftist the same way which Clinton did. I mean, that's like the Democratic playbook. They know that the base is to the left. So what they do is we'll go to the left in the primaries and then try to creep back to the middle, hoping to pick up independents and moderates, which to me, it just doesn't work. The country is divided. Either you're mostly for this stuff, or you're mostly for that stuff. It's not a lot of people who are just sitting there in the middle who, I don't know which way I'm going to go. And so that's the reason why I feel the Democrats have struggled. They keep trying to go for this mythical voter that's not ever going to vote for them. I mean, for instance, every time I talk to a Republican, they always say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't go for this person, or you shouldn't go for that person. You should get somebody like Joe Biden." And then I asked them, "Are you going to vote for Joe Biden, or would you vote for Joe Biden?" "Oh, well, no, I wouldn't vote for him." "Well, I just figure we're like one of you guys." And so that's all of them advice. Yeah, you guys should vote for him, even though none of us are going to vote for him. That's who you guys should make as your candidate. And it's like, Democrats, do you understand how insane that sounds? The Republicans never do that. So I guess that's all. I'm starting to ramble on a little bit too much. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and good night.